We will make America great again.
The world's most consequential election is just around the corner, and with it, economic and security implications for the Indo-Pacific.
China has become challenged to what we might refer to as American hegemony.
So if the US does withdraw, it will spark many, many years of navel-gazing and agonizing in Southeast Asia.
Due to some political trends in the US, the promotion of free trade doesn't hold as much cachet as it used to.
How will the next US president view the Indo-Pacific? And how will the region deal with the new occupant in the White House?
If there's no US presence and there's a vacuum of power, there might be destabilization.
"52-year-old Vianney Muli has been fishing for over 2 decades. He makes his living off the sea's bounty in Zambales, on the western coast of the Philippines. But lately, he has not been able to visit one of his favorite fishing grounds, the Scarborough Shoal.
Kasi hindi na pwede doon sa malapitan sa Scarborough. Nanggugulo lang sila yung mga China na yan dyan sa West Philippine Sea. Nakatakot namin dahil baka kinabukasan kung di kami aalis, baka water cannon ang namin.
The Scarborough Shoal is one of the several land masses claimed by both China and the Philippines in the South China Sea or the West Philippine Sea to the Filipinos. For the past year, tensions have reached boiling point in these contested waters as Chinese and Filipino vessels repeatedly clashed.
Why is there an escalation? Why are there more incidents that are actually taking place? No, I think we can say that there are maybe 2 or 3 reasons for this. The first one, of course, has to do with an increased assertiveness on the part of China to basically assert that exclusive claim that it actually has, right? But those incidents are also a byproduct of the decision on the part of the Philippines to also be more present in the areas where we also have a claim.
Sometime in January 2022, President Marcos visited President Xi Jinping. They shook hands, and the hope was there will be warm relationship. But then the Philippine military said they don't trust China in the South China Sea, and China says they don't trust the Philippines. So there's a lack of trust between these 2 countries.
But the relationship between China and the Philippines wasn't the only one that changed in the last few years. This period of tension coincided with the closer ties with another superpower in the region, America. In February last year, the Marcos administration announced the expansion of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Arrangement with the US, allowing American military to access more military facilities in the Philippines. This April, the 2 countries held its largest joint military exercise in decades, involving 16,000 troops. In August 2024, the US offered to escort Philippine ships in the South China Sea. These moves are part of American President Joe Biden's plan to engage with the region, a plan dubbed the Indo-Pacific Strategy.
We've engaged in a very sustained way with ASEAN, for example, and believe in ASEAN centrality for the region. We've also created much stronger relationships with countries from the Philippines to Vietnam.
Launched in February 2022, President Biden's Indo-Pacific strategy has 5 objectives. Advance a free and open Indo-Pacific. Build connections within and beyond the region. Drive regional prosperity. Bolster Indo-Pacific security and build regional resilience to transnational threats.
China has become challenged to what we might refer to as American hegemony, for instance, which has been recognized as such ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union. right, back in 1990. So in that context, no, the United States needed to respond to a perceived increase, no, in terms of China's influence, no, and ability to shape relationships, no, within the Asia-Pacific region.
The U.S. does not want China to expand its powers into the Pacific. And so South China Sea has become a theater for conflict between these two elephants.
The Indo-Pacific strategy echoes a similar move made by President Obama. The East Asia strategy, also known as the pivot to Asia. Biden had served as Obama's vice president.
It started with President Obama, carried out by Secretary Hillary Clinton, 2012. So they were pivoting back to Asia. And President Biden, when he became president, merely continued this Indo-Pacific plan. Under that Indo-Pacific plan, the U.S. says they want to fly, sail, and navigate in the international waters, including the South China Sea. But the bottom line really is the U.S. does not want the Chinese Navy to venture into the Pacific Ocean openly.
Outside of the Philippines, President Biden also revitalized other regional partnerships. One of those is the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or the Quad. It is a group of 4, made up of Australia, India, Japan, and the USA. The Quad was first formed in 2007, but dissolved in 2008 following Australia's departure. It was revived in 2017 under President Trump and further advanced under President Biden.
At its core, the Quad is actually like a 600-pound gorilla because of the immense geopolitical weight that Australia, Japan, India, and the United States brings to the table. 2 of them are nuclear armed with nuclear weapons, and they are advanced economies, and they can bring power to bear whenever there's an altercation in the region. Therein lies the power of the Quad.
The Quad is key to President Biden's strategy. In the document outlining the Indo-Pacific strategy, the Quad was mentioned 13 times. Biden met his counterparts virtually in March 2021 for the first Quad Leaders Summit. They have met 5 other times since then.
And it's not just between the 4 members of the Quad, they are also bringing in other powers that are coming from outside the Indo-Pacific. So for example, the United Kingdom is now supposed to be in a series of exercises that are being conducted by the US and Japan. So the Quad is becoming this omnibus kind of coalition where they welcome any power that's interested in building what they call a so-called rules-based international order.
Members of the Quad have also participated in joint exercises in the South China Sea. In September, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand joined the US and the Philippines on patrols of the South China Sea. The increased US presence in its backyard has drawn the ire of China.
关于美菲的军事合作，中方已多次表明立场。美国不是南海问题的当事方，无权介入中菲两国之间的涉海问题。
China's position on the Quad has been very steady and consistent, that it thinks that it's destabilizing, of course, because it challenges China. In fact, to any kind of unilateral that smacks of any intention of actually managing the rise of China or challenging China, China views it very negatively.
But ultimately, American engagement in Asia hinges on who is in charge. During the 4 years of the Trump administration, between Obama and Biden's presidencies, Southeast Asia was seen as a low priority.
The Trump administration, and we can see this even now in terms of the campaigning that's taking place, tends to emphasize domestic developments in the United States, American presence in the Asia-Pacific region, was seen as secondary, if you will, no, to the need to actually address domestic issues.
It's less muscular engagement with Southeast Asia during Trump's time compared when the Democrats, when they would use their naval power to project themselves in this part of the world. These are not America's problems, and Trump does not want to be involved in any of these wars.
On November 5th, the US will elect a new commander-in-chief. In the running is current Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. How will American alliances in the Indo-Pacific change with the new occupant in the White House?
The US sees China as a rival in all domains, including security, trade, and so on. And whoever becomes US president, this policy will not change because the Republicans and Democrats agree that they need to control the rise of China, and they view China as a potential rival.
I don't think that there's any reason for the Harris administration, or for even a Trump administration for that matter, no, to actually see the dissolution of the Quad. It's just a question of how significant is the Quad going to be in American foreign policy towards the region. The Quad will be there, no? And a Harris administration, I think, would take advantage of its presence and actually increase levels of cooperation and work with and engagement with the Quad countries.
While Vice President Harris rarely touched on foreign policy matters on the campaign trail, she signaled her position during a 2022 visit to the Philippines.
We will continue to rally our allies and partners against unlawful and irresponsible behavior. When the international rules-based order is threatened somewhere, it is threatened everywhere.
As for former President Trump, if he is re-elected to office, the relationship might be more transactional.
There was a Indo-Pacific strategy that was adopted by the Trump administration, but a significant part of it now asserted the notion of American allies actually taking more on the burdens of security in the region.
We know President Trump is a businessman. Businessman, you get what you want at the right price that he's asking, right? You want security, pay for it. You're the one who benefit it. Right, so it's just an economics question. What is the right price to pay?
In 2024, a survey of ASEAN countries found that 50.5% of respondents preferred China over the US, a significant change from the year before, where Southeast Asian nations clearly favored the US.
China has been pointing to the Philippines that you can't rely on the United States. And the United States has been spending so much time giving reassurances to its allies, no, and even to its non-allies, no, in the region, that it will not abandon the region. So, if there is going to be a drawing down of American assets, no, in the region, it's going to take a hit as far as its credibility to its allies actually concerned.
The Indo-Pacific Plan, however, is not only a security strategy. There is also a promise to invest in the region. Will this change with the new president?
Here, between Indonesia and Australia, is Asia's newest nation.
Here, at the Malaysian Research Accelerator for Technology and Innovation, students are working on building robots, a partnership funded by Texas A&M University. Malaysia has plans to be a regional technology hub by 2030.
The FDIs has been pouring in this part of the world. They're coming to Malaysia, and essentially in the area of data centers and this and that. The semiconductor business is booming in Malaysia. Up north, Penang is and really thriving.
Scutta Robots set up their lab here in the Meranti compound in 2020. Meranti is Malaysia's research and innovation agency. It hopes to transform innovative ideas like Scuttle robots into marketable products. To date, Scuttle robots have invested $200,000 into its Malaysia operations. In building links to Asia, the Biden administration sought to leverage its key advantages: technology and economics. The Indo-Pacific Strategy document outlined how the US will promote new partnerships for cutting-edge joint research in critical domains of science and technology. So, in May 2022, President Biden launched the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF. Malaysia, along with 6 other ASEAN countries, are part of this 14-member bloc.
The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF, was supposed to be an economic centerpiece for America's foreign policy in the region. Things like that is quite important because you need to show that America has a strategic direction that it wants to go towards, as well as provide credence to the claims that it's committed to this region for the long term. IPEF came in at the start of the Biden administration's term. He was hoping that this would create a new framework by which the US would be able to engage the region in terms of economics.
The IPEF is structured around 4 main pillars: trade, supply chains, clean energy, decarbonization and infrastructure, as well as tax and anti-corruption. Of these, much progress has been made in negotiations on the clean economy front. The streets of Ho Chi Minh City are never without the din of motorbikes. 7 million bikes swarm the city every day, filling the air with harmful exhaust and carbon monoxide. But one company is hoping to change that.
We are Dotbike, a Vietnamese startup manufacturer focusing on electric motorcycles. We have been on the market for 5 years, and our mission is to replace all of the gasoline motorcycle in Southeast Asia to become electric vehicles.
Green energy solutions and combating climate change are a key pillar of the IPEF. With Vietnam being a partner country, Dotbike stands to benefit from American engagement on this front.
The US government have a lot of activities and in terms of collaboration or investment initiative that contribute a lot in terms of to help the development of EV sectors in Vietnam. For example, from my Dotbike experience, we have the opportunity to join a program with the USAID. This is a program that allows us to have the opportunity to know more about international technology, and also we have the opportunity to meet, to connect with the potential investors, potential consumers, and even the industry experts.
Adoption of the electric bikes in Vietnam has been slow. In 2023, only 10% of Vietnam's vehicles were electric. The bottleneck? The lack of the necessary infrastructure like charging stations. Dotbike hopes American investment and partnerships will help to grow this sector.
It's still a very potential for this collaboration that the US government keep investing in terms of helping to contributing to develop the EV sectors in Vietnam.
While the IPEF has made progress on its climate initiatives, other areas are lacking. In November 2023, talks on the IPEF were suspended over disagreements between member countries. Some Asian countries refuse to abide by tough labor standards without the promise of market access or lower tariffs from the US.
Due to some political trends in the US, the promotion of free trade, the notion of lowering these market barriers, it doesn't hold as much cachet as it used to. The problem is, for countries in this region, we're very used to the traditional kind of trade agreements, which say that we're going to lower tariffs, we're going to lower non-tariff barriers, and therefore incentivize you to agree to these kinds of demands that we have.
On the part of the Americans, there is also some wariness across cross-border data flow.
in recent years, there's been more pushback against this willingness to give tech firms a free hand. They feel that, if you give these tech giants too much freedom, what they can do is detrimental to American society as a whole and the economy to an extent. So that was actually why, in October 2023, the US withdrew its long-held demands when it came to digital trade at the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And subsequently, 1 month later, the talks concerning digital trade in IPEF were also suspended.
With the US elections looming, the ambiguous status of the IPEF has a sense of déjà vu. It recalls another ambitious trade agreement that ended up dead in the water. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP. The TPP was President Obama's marquee free trade agreement, which covered 12 Pacific Rim economies. But it never came into force. In 2017, after President Trump was elected, he withdrew from the TPP, saying it was a job killer.
When Trump withdrew the US from the TPP back in January 2017, this could be seen in a couple of ways. For example, you could see this as Mr. Trump trying to spite his predecessor, who he clearly had no love lost for. On the other hand, you could also see it as a culmination of years of simmering resentment within the US population towards this idea of free trade. Normally, we're used to this idea of the US government being pro-free trade. This was from the 1980s and 1990s. But in the 2000s, as the China shock took place, as the American manufacturing base got hollowed out, and as well as due to lingering resentment from the great financial crisis of 2008, there was a more concentrated undercurrent that free trade doesn't benefit us as much as we thought it would, and they started to turn against it.
With the TPP nuded, countries in the Indo-Pacific fast-tracked another trade agreement, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. This is a partnership which includes China, but not the US.
RCEP is what you call a traditional orthodox free trade agreement, and it's all about reducing tariffs, about improving trade and developing a free trade area. So RCEP essentially is a market access mechanism, whereas IPEF is not.
RCEP is more economic oriented, even though Cambodia and Laos, Myanmar are treated as the poorest countries in ASEAN, but all the 10 countries of ASEAN are invited to join. So the differences between RCEP is that RCEP focuses on economic and allow all the 10 countries of ASEAN to join, but IPEF proposed by the United States, only 7 countries of ASEAN, and they are more political oriented.
With trade negotiations and IPEF stalled till after the US elections, how might the next US president approach trade with the Indo-Pacific?
I think it'd be pretty much status quo under Kamala Harris. There's just one concern is that we are still looking for who are the kind of the forceful personalities that will inform her approach to the region, and we haven't seen much of that recently. Maybe it's due to the heat of the presidential campaign.
I think that the United States are becoming increasingly pragmatic, in the sense that I don't see even a Democratic administration pursuing free trade at all costs.
President Trump, under his previous administration, he did not pay much attention to other countries. He will focus more on the internal issue of the United States, and he will not pay much attention to other alliances in the world. And I'm sure that if President Trump become the president of the United States again, we will not see the IPEF anymore. IPEF will be disappear because that is not his foreign policy. That is not his initiative.
Trump has vowed to axe the IPEF if elected.
Withdrawing from IPEF could be a possibility, but I think it will be like cutting off your nose to spite your face, because IPEF is the only kind of economic engagement mechanism that the US has left with the region. If you take that away, the US has basically nothing apart from very long-standing foreign direct investments that the US has in the region. So if the US does withdraw from IPEF, it will probably spark many, many years of actually navel gazing and agonizing in Southeast Asia and wider Asia about what role the US plays in the region.
Yet, as both superpowers, US and China, compete for influence in the Indo-Pacific region, countries that can balance the two titans have reaped rewards. Will this change with the next president?
America great again.
Education. Can't take education away from me.
I feel like we can't get ahead.
Vietnam, one of the fastest growing economies in Southeast Asia. It is in an enviable position, being courted by both China and the US. American wireless technology firm Qualcomm has had a presence in Vietnam since 2003.
Vietnam has a vast talent pool for engineers and world-class infrastructure. And also, we do see the rise of startup in technology sector, and with the R&D and the center in Vietnam, we also contribute to the country workforce development. We now working with one of the leading telecommunication company in Vietnam to design and enable the country to roll out 5G quicker and with a more cost-effective way.
In 2013, total Vietnamese exports in terms of electronics to the US, it amounted to about $110 million. Fast forward to 2023, February, the amount just for semiconductors had grown to about $562 million. And that was just in February, and it was also a 75% increase year on year, going to show just how much it had increased and how rapidly it had done so.
And soon, Vietnam's growth may be spurred by additional US investments. In 2023, President Biden visited Hanoi with billion-dollar deals being signed between US and Vietnamese companies.
The US government also invests $2 million US into a workforce development program, and that will benefit Qualcomm operation in Vietnam because we will have more access to the local talent pool.
President Biden saw a moment in which Vietnamese interests and US interests overlapped in terms of, say, strategy and in terms of economics, and he wanted to leverage that moment in order to improve the bilateral relationship.
Countries like Vietnam have capitalized on the US-China economic rivalry, which began in 2018, when President Trump enacted a series of tariffs on Chinese goods.
These companies that had enjoyed their time in China suddenly felt the need to to expand their reach, to diversify, due to this geopolitical pressure. And that's when we saw a massive influx of investments into Southeast Asia. Countries like Vietnam, countries like Thailand, all benefited from this.
This diversification came to be known as the China Plus One strategy.
China Plus One strategy is part of a de-risking, so that when the American president imposes high tariff on China, that means they will not be competitive when exporting to the United States. So they move down south to Vietnam so that they can continue to enjoy lower tariffs when they export back to the United States. That is what is meant by economists when they say China +1. It's a de-risking strategy.
This would intensify during Biden's term. He would keep Trump's tariffs in place. Additionally, under Biden's charge, the 2022 CHIPS Act barred the export of high-tech chips to China and restricted U.S. investment into this sector of the Chinese economy.
Say about 2020, the US suddenly realizes that a lot of its chips, they're either coming from China or they're coming from places that are near China and, may be at risk in the event of some kind of conflict. So it started to move semiconductor manufacturing, or rather its companies started to move out of China and go into Southeast Asia, particularly Vietnam and Malaysia.
Intel is planning to invest $7 billion in a factory in Malaysia. NVIDIA has invested over $250 million with companies in Vietnam. In 2020, Qualcomm unveiled its R&D facility in Hanoi, the chip designers' fest in Southeast Asia.
With the presence and the R&D lab in Vietnam, we want to enable Vietnamese company to design and manufacturers make in Vietnam product and bring those products to not just to Vietnam consumer market, but also to other countries in the world.
Meanwhile, Beijing is not sitting by the sidelines and ceding the region to Washington. A few months after Biden's Vietnam visit, Chinese President Xi Jinping also called on Hanoi with his own set of trade deals. China has also courted other Asian countries, including close US allies, Japan and South Korea.
So the laws of economics does not respect all of this geopolitics. People will trade, countries will trade wherever they want to trade. No amount of asking or begging will stop these countries from dealing with China because it is in their interest.
This competition among, of course, the United States and China has many characteristics, and one of the salient characteristics is the ability of China to fill some gaps in terms of US disengagement in the region, in economics, and especially in infrastructure and development assistance.
China is ASEAN's top trading partner. It has strengthened ties with many countries in the Indo-Pacific with its Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. Launched in 2013, the initiative offers generous loans and construction undertakings of infrastructure projects. In Southeast Asia, Indonesia and Vietnam have been some of the largest recipients of BRI investments.
The Belt and Road Initiative was used by China as a tool of economic statecraft, but also to promote the role of China as a leader in providing economic goods. This political component of the message that China sent consistently ever since 2013, when the Belt and Road was launched, is that China is out to provide development assistance against what was the so-called Washington consensus, so the old paradigm of development.
In Southeast Asia, the Belt and Road Initiative, it's actually been rather successful. We've seen recent success stories like the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed railway, like the China-Laos railway, kind of testament to China's ability to build these projects in what I would say Western countries and firms would consider high-risk environments, where the economic case for these things might not be as strong. But China went ahead to build them anyway, partly due to a different, shall we say, project philosophy, that if you want to get rich, you got to build a road first.
In sum, Southeast Asia has largely benefited as the superpowers jostled for influence. The question is, will this continue to be the case with the new president in the White House?
A second Trump administration, as unpredictable as the man can be. I think in Washington right now, there's kind of this bipartisan realization that the Indo-Pacific, including Southeast Asia, is a very important region. So he's not just going to up and abandon us. He might dial back some of the initiatives that President Biden put in place, including the Indo-Pacific economic framework. But at the same time, we might see a kind of flowering of personal relationships between him and certain Southeast Asian leaders, like Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. For the potential Harris administration, I think a lot of her strategy towards Southeast Asia is going to mirror what her predecessor, President Biden, did. She's been to the Philippines, she's been to Vietnam, I believe she's been to Thailand. She probably understands the value of showing up, reassuring them about America's presence in this region and its willingness to engage with us.
I think it speaks to how many ASEAN member states operate in the Sino-US universe, which is as open as can be, as in there are no kind of fixed relationships or in terms of alliances. They are very open about engaging both China and the United States. So to put it rather crudely, it's about having your cake and eating it at the same time.
But being caught between two superpowers isn't always a bed of roses. Should tensions with China escalate under a new American president, will Asian countries be asked to choose sides?
You may know this as vulva.
In less than 2 weeks, US voters will head to the polls to elect a new president. It is shaping up to be a tight race, with both candidates neck and neck in the polls.
This is going to be a very tight race until the very end.
While both candidates have largely focused on domestic issues, these have implications on foreign policy.
I will recommit the nation to global leadership in the sectors that will define the next century. We will invest in biomanufacturing and aerospace, remain dominant in AI and quantum computing, blockchain and other emerging technologies, expand our lead in clean energy innovation and manufacturing.
We're going to bring thousands and thousands of businesses and trillions of dollars in wealth back to the good old USA. I want GE, IBM, and every other manufacturer that left us to be filled with regret and come sprinting back to our shores, and they will.
To do so, Trump has proposed an additional 60% tariff on all products from China and 10% tariff on all foreign imports. While Harris has been more reticent on this front, she could continue President Biden's tariff regime. This includes a 100% tariff on electric vehicles and 50% on solar panels. And here, the China Plus One strategy may not help due to country of origin rules.
What we're seeing now is that the United States are more keen to impose tariffs on Chinese goods or goods that are originated in China and then may be assembled or perfectioned in other countries. Malaysia is part of the supply chain of certain important technological components and other electronics that then are exported to the United States, but the components are originated in China. Therefore, the rule of origin applicable to the United States will treat these goods as if they were made in China.
We are already seeing like semiconductor companies in Malaysia contemplating whether they should have a supply chain wholly for the Chinese economic system and another system for the US system. I think these tariffs will just accentuate the dilemmas that they are already facing right now. What we see a bifurcation of kind of a China universe of trade and economics and the US universe.
Should the winning candidate extend tariffs, consumers, both in the US and in Asia, will feel the effects.
There was one study done where it was estimated that the average US family is going to see its expenditures rise by about 2.6K per year. Of course, this is before you accounting for the price hikes that domestic producers in the US might do because of rising raw material costs, or even due to retaliatory tariffs by foreign partners of the US in response to these universal tariffs. So that's a concern for them. There are countries such as Cambodia and Vietnam for which the US is a major export destination. The imposition of these universal tariffs it's going to wreak havoc with their economy.
Now that the American economy is on a mend and the Feds have already lowered down interest rates, but if Trump wins and he pursues the 60% tariff, then that will put a shock to the U.S. economy and to the global economy as well. One is inflation for Americans, which means the Fed would raise interest rates, which means higher interest rates for most countries around the world, which means higher borrowing costs for all of us and inflation for all of us.
Tariffs and trade barriers continue the trend of a retreat from globalization. Will this change with who comes out ahead in the race to the White House?
This decoupling will probably happen and continue to happen regardless if there's a Democrat or a Republican in the White House, with certain technologies, cutting-edge technologies that probably have what we call dual use content. So they are technologies that can be employed or used for civilian purposes, but also for the development of advanced military technology. What we saw in 2022 is that even the Biden administration imposed sanctions on semiconductors, and indirectly these sanctions compelled South Korean, Taiwanese, and with limited extent Japanese producers to decouple their supply chains.
With such bifurcation, the concern for Indo-Pacific countries is, will they be forced to pick sides?
Countries always choose sides. When they vote in the UN, right, resolutions, they have to choose sides, right? On trade, they choose sides which country to sell to, right? There's always a choice. But the choice we don't want is when these two elephants fight and they ask you which side are you on and you will join them in this fight. Nobody wants to join in this fight.
In terms of choosing sides, now that is more than just about economics. It's economics and geopolitics at the same time. This is a mantra among Southeast Asian countries that they don't want to choose sides. But the fact is that they choose sides on a daily basis. Whether Indonesia chooses to be part of China's Belt and Road Initiative, for example, that is choosing a side. It's choosing a Chinese side, theoretically. But it doesn't mean that once you choose a Chinese initiative, it forecloses you from choosing a US initiative, because at the very end of the day, they are not choosing a side, quote unquote, they are choosing the side on the part of their national interest. They decide whether they want to join BRI, in their own interest. They decide whether they want to choose IPAF in their own interest. And the only time when they actually have to choose sides, quote unquote, I would think, is when there's a situation of high tension, when there's a conflict scenario in the region, be it in the Taiwan Strait or in the South China Sea. That's when you actually have to choose a side, as in whether you will assist the US if there's invasion of Taiwan by China.
Back in Zambales, Philippines, for fisherman Vianney, at least, it is clear which side he's picking.
Ang gusto ko lang dyan sa gobyerno, nga mawala yung barko dyan, yung mga China. Yun lang ang kong hinihiling ko para makapangisda kami uli dyan.
Yung presensya po ba ng US makakatulong yun?
Sa akin, makakatulong sila. Pupunta dito para lang gigirahin yung China yan.
In the end, most countries in the Indo-Pacific would want the US to continue its engagement in the region. However, who wins the presidency will determine what form this engagement takes.
We cannot exclude the fact that an increased US presence may be destabilizing or trigger harsh Chinese reactions like what we saw. However, we can also argue that this increased US presence is a function of an increased Chinese assertiveness in certain geopolitical flashpoints of the region.
It is without debate that the US has played a strong security role that has fostered the development and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific since 1945. The Philippines, Vietnam, Singapore, Korea, they all benefited by the security guarantees that were given by the United States in the region since 1945.
If there's no US presence and there's a vacuum of power, there might be destabilization. Japan will look after itself. Every country, Indonesia, big country, will arm themselves to the teeth to look after themselves. So in a sense, this is a dilemma. Countries in Southeast Asia wants the US as a resident power, but as a responsible resident power, not provoking a fight and not trying to destabilize the situation in the region, but putting missiles. Too much presence by the United States can be destabilizing. Zero presence can also be destabilizing.